You know, 59 days earlier, the New Mexico legislators were sent to Santa Fe for a very clear mandate, and that was to do something about crime. And so the significance of this tragic event doesn't go unnoticed. Is because on the final day of a legislative session where we were sent to address crime and didn't do so, we failed to take action. One of the most horrific, tragic events happened in Las Cruces, and I think that is quite significant to note.
Mm-hmm.
I would say for me, as a parent and as someone that deals with children every day, daily, it was shocking. I went to bed early, so I didn't see it until the next morning, and it was pretty big by then. I thought of my children, my grandchildren, and how it can affect them. I think about the responsibility that we have as support people in the schools, and many times we forget that they come to us, and so we just kind of went into action as a mental health group for the district about what we can do to support them. They've been on spring break for 2 weeks, so the students have been away, looking forward to coming back on Monday, maybe a little bit tired, but ready to come back. And so now we knew that we had to be ready for them walking into this. Mm-hmm. So just kind of went into action.
Mm-hmm. And Senator, let's talk a little bit about that. Can you talk a little bit more about your collaboration with local authorities to be able to pass laws and legislation? You know, a lot of people on social media and people that we've talked to advocating for change, I mean, how do we make a difference?
You know, the failure for the legislator to take action during what we call the public safety legislative session is a mark of failed leadership at the top. This is a tragic event that should have not happened. We went in there with good intentions to address not just the rising crime rate in New Mexico, but very specifically the juvenile crime rate. We have this exponential growth that we're seeing among these young juvenile offenders. And there was a call in from both Democrats and Republicans. We had district attorneys and a number of law enforcement agencies, including our own chief here from Las Cruces, who spent a lot of time in the Roundhouse advocating for change very specifically to juvenile justice reform. I will tell you there was a very important bill that was introduced, the Juvenile Delinquency Act. Not only did legislators refuse to take a vote on that, they refused to give that bill a single hearing. And so on the last day of session, to receive news that there has been a horrific attack committed by youth offenders targeting our youth in Las Cruces, our disappointment as legislators for not making meaningful change just simply turned to anger as a mother and a lawmaker. And I would remind people that we have to demand more of our locally elected officials to take action. We have got to do more in New Mexico to put criminals out of business. And my call is if legislators refuse to do that, voters are going to have to take to action to put legislators and put your locally elected leaders out of a job.
Has there been any communication since this tragic event happened with other lawmakers who maybe were not for what you guys were trying to pass previously?
You know, there has. While I support the governor's call for a special session to address the crime rate, I am not as optimistic. We had 2 months to address public safety, and we did very little to do that. While there were some good bills passed, and I will say that I championed many of those, we did CYFD reform, we did some competency changes to laws that were championed. The most meaningful bills, if we're being very direct, were left on the table. Meaningful bills that would have actually addressed crime were left on the table. And so I'm not optimistic that if we go back, we will target exactly where we need to be focused as lawmakers.
Yeah. And District Attorney Fernando Macias, can you explain what happens next from the legal standpoint when it comes to the suspects involved?
Well, the 4 individuals will be before, their cases will be before the grand jury tomorrow, and we'll be presenting that. And of course, we're presenting 3 counts of first-degree murder and 3 counts of conspiracy. We hope that the grand jury will agree with the evidence that will be presented to them and that we'll be going forward with charges along the lines that I've just described.
Thank you. And Chief Story, can you talk a little bit about new developments in the case? What can you share?
Well, we've obviously worked very closely with the District Attorney's Office to get to this point, and that's one thing I think that's important to highlight is there's a lot of tragedy and there's a lot of bad in this, but there's also some silver linings to see how closely we worked with our federal partners, our other local partners, but with the District Attorney's Office to not only arrest those 4 people within about 36, 37 hours, but also make sure that the case is already proceeding to the grand jury. As we get more and more information, we get more videos, we talk to more witnesses, the case gets stronger. And so what I can say is I feel more confident over time about hopefully the ultimate outcome will be a conviction for all 4 people involved.
And what is your guys' message to the families of the victims?
Well, again, as a parent, I can't imagine what they're going through. And to be clear, some of the people that were both killed and injured had absolutely nothing to do with the dispute, which the dispute isn't reason for anyone to be hurt or killed. It's crazy. But a lot of those people that were hurt and some of the people that were killed had nothing to do with even the dispute. And so for those parents that are grieving, we grieve with them. I think all of our community grieves with them. And all I can say now is I think we're all committed to finding ways to make Las Cruces better. We can't prevent tragedies all the time. Like, there's nothing we can do to prevent every tragedy. But I think we want to use this as a reason to move forward and make things better and safer. And we have to do that, otherwise it's in vain.
Yeah.
And I just want to emphasize that we have all the tools right now to be able to go forward with a successful prosecution. And that includes 3 juveniles. Because the law does allow us, especially if it's a first-degree murder, it allows us to try someone who's under the age of 18 but older than 15, allows us to go forward with a prosecution. And I'm anticipating, because of the work that the Las Cruces Police Department has done in terms of the intensity of gathering all of the evidence, the speed in which they moved, I really anticipate that we can be successful in the prosecution. But I don't want there to be any doubt that we're not able to go forward with the prosecution, even in spite of the age of 3 of the individuals.
Absolutely. And, one thing top of mind that a lot of people were talking about, and even you, Chief Story, the first press conference that you had, you were very open and honest about clearing the air about a photo on social media that was circulating of a guy carrying an AR-15. Can we talk a little bit about open carry laws in New Mexico and what's allowed, what's not, and then just the look of someone carrying that gun out in the open? I've talked to so many people about how guns were visible at this event at Young Park, and it almost feels like people just had them out like they were a purse, so very visible, obviously a concern. I spoke to one girl that was in high school. She's like, I saw someone lift up their shirt and they had a gun, so I told my friend, we got to get out of here. Can you talk a little bit about that and just open carry laws and that photo in general? A lot of people asking, is there any consequences for something like that?
So I'll start with just the fact that the culture at this event and events like it, and amongst our juveniles in general, is the problem. And right now, the access to guns that they have is through illicit means. They're stealing them, and then they're selling them amongst themselves through Telegram and other social media apps. And that's kind of created a situation where there are guns everywhere, but they're not obtaining them, generally speaking, through legal means. New Mexico is an open carry state. There are places where it's restricted, such as banks, federal buildings, schools. And so a park under state law isn't necessarily a prohibited place to possess the firearm. There's a distinction between state law and federal law, so that may not necessarily be true under federal law. But it's not so much that he has a gun, it's the fact that what he's doing with the gun. And if you watch the videos, not just the pictures, he's using it to illuminate the tires, but he's pointing it at multiple people in the process, and nobody even reacts to it because they're just used to seeing that. And that's, I think, the problem. I don't know for sure that it's not unlawful, but at least not under state law.
Mm-hmm. Did anyone want to add anything to that? Just the rhetoric, I guess, around guns being that visible. I guess my next question is, what should the parent do? Conversations have to be opened up as well with the parent. Talk to your kids. We hear that often from counselors that we talk to. Did you want to touch on that?
Well, and I think that's part of it is that, similar to what he said, it's sometimes it seems like the students and the children are desensitized to it. They see it in music, they see it on social media, and so when they see it in the park at a nighttime event, maybe those girls, they did the right thing by leaving, but some of them just thought this is part of what comes along with it. And I think it is those conversations. It's in the schools, we do have them for the set amount of time, and so we do what influence we can, but I think so much from the parents and the influence that they have. But we have different programs within, we have very close connections with our SROs in the buildings, but I think just having the conversations and opening up our resources. We did, once all this went into place, we had so many agencies outside reaching out, coming to the schools. They set up triage centers at many of our schools, and so we were ready, but I think it's just letting them know what's going on. We've had parents call since then and say, is there counseling available? We're blessed, all the high schools, that we do have school-based health centers, so we have people in the building that can help, but it's just lots of conversations.
Absolutely. And when it comes to Las Cruces Public Schools, thank you so much for being here, by the way, in representation, because I think that's a very important piece to the puzzle, especially you dealing with the youth as often as you do. Talk to me a little bit about the metal detectors that are being placed in schools. Do you feel like that could have been a reason why? What is the need for that? Can you elaborate more on that?
I know that we have them at our school. I'm at Oregon Mountain High School, and we do have them set up. They're not working. They're not plugged in yet. I know that there's some training and different things that need to get approved, some district policies that need to get looked at so that we ensure fairness to everyone. I do know that it's sad to think about that's where we've come to. We've talked about the manpower it's going to take for it, but I think the manpower it would take to probably staff the incident that happened is far greater than what it would take to, staff some doors coming in. I think, it's people feel different ways about it. The rights of the children, the rights that they have, and are we taking away, but are we doing it to protect children? And so I think it's some conversations that, decision makers have, and I appreciate that you take it so seriously and all that you do for our children. But it's interesting that we'll see how it goes once they are operational. Right now they're not at any of the schools. We're one of the training ones or one of the pilot ones to have it. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes there.
Is there any resources that you feel that the district is lacking to better help support students and to help them stay out of trouble?
I think a lot of prevention could be. I know, thinking about the younger, I'm in high school, but thinking about the counselors and the teachers in elementaries and middle schools and what resources do they have to help kind of maybe digital citizenship, social media things, media literacy, about what they see in the media and what is real and what's not. That would be something that we could start with younger groups, something like that. Also, connections for parents. I know some of our community schools, we have several community schools that are really doing great things with the parents that involve them, that bring them in, and it is a community. And so just having those resources for them. Like I said, many of the agencies reached out to us and just offered their help if they were going to send people to us. We almost were like, wait, we don't need that many people. We have our staff on hand. But it was great to know that we have those resources. So any programs that they do, I know there's lots of different programs for the youth, and I think keeping them involved. And I know that I don't know any of the children personally that were involved, but just hearing different stories about kids that went to kindergarten with them or middle school, and they said they weren't like that. They weren't that kind of kids, and just kind of getting steered wrong. So what can we do preventative to help in our educational role?
Mm-hmm. Did anyone want to chime in?
I'm sorry, we have spent decades trying to reverse the trends. Mm-hmm. And it's going to continue to be a challenge even if you change laws. You have to change culture. And until we start really committing ourselves to ensure that no child leaves the third grade delayed in their education, we're going to continue to have the problem. No matter whether you have diversion programs, no matter if you have more effective law enforcement, no matter if you have stronger laws, you're going to be dealing with the same issue, because people in our positions who have served there decades ago were trying to do the same thing. And it hasn't materialized. In fact, in some ways, that kind of violent culture has only expanded over time. And a lot of it is because it's young people that haven't been successful academically, who have been delayed, who don't think they have a good track. We need more work, and we need more employment opportunities for young people. We need to make them see that there's a way to earn money early, cover expenses, help their family. We need a culture change, not so much a let's try to help them now. That's absolutely necessary in terms of not letting the problem get any larger than what it is. But if we're going to reverse the trends, we better be implementing all of these more effective strategies when children across the board, we're talking everybody, that's what intimidates everyone, that the mass of students that we have to be working with is so large, has a cost, but if we don't make that commitment far earlier, we're going to continue to deal with the issue.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think it's important to remember that there were already laws that were being violated before a single gunfire was shot that night. We have a generation that we are losing to violence because we are failing to hold these youth offenders accountable. These killers didn't become killers overnight. That sort of violence escalates over time. There's a long history in which we failed to intervene on that path that got us here. Human trafficking, aggravated assault, rape. All of these offenses had been committed by many of those suspects long before that there was a triple homicide. I agree with the culture of what happens. That's because we've created in New Mexico a culture of disrespect for law enforcement and complete disregard for laws because there are no meaningful consequences when you do that. And so I will remind everyone that the legislator and the governor sets the tone for that culture. And when the legislator spends more time targeting law enforcement officers, and I say that with advancing the defund the police movement, by removing qualified immunity, by introducing legislation that has presumption of bad faith of our law enforcement officers, and yet spends zero time addressing crime and criminals directly. We're setting the tone that creates that disregard of law enforcement and creates a lawless state in which criminals can flourish.
And I would add that I agree with both of you. Thank you, Senator, and thank you, District Attorney Macias. It is what we're looking at. This is reality. What we're faced right now is with reality, and there's crime, and there's an increase of it. And we do need consequences that are harsh and send a message. And that's the reality. The intervention is the community schools and other things that we can do for the intervention to get involved as a community. This is not a police problem. This is not a public safety problem. This is a community problem, and we need to get together and join in. And then we get to the third grade level, then we start the prevention. And so we need public safety immediately, we need intervention, and we need prevention.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for your insight and your input on that. We really appreciate it. Chief, could you talk a little bit about what your department is up against at the moment? You know, there's been talk on social media as well. Well, why weren't the police there earlier at this event? Did you want to talk a little bit about that and just what you all are up against? And then when it comes to what you guys are up against when it comes to juveniles as well?
Well, and these issues are not new to us. I mean, we've been dealing with staffing issues for several years, as most departments are, and we can't be everywhere at once. And so it's difficult to be at all these events. It's difficult to be at every call that we need to be at. But there is silver lining still there, and that is we have to fill the positions that we have. So the city has 220 positions for officers. We're about 188 right now that are actually out there working. I have a few that are on long-term military deployments. I need closer to 220. And the other thing is obviously identifying these events ahead of time so that we can structure projects to deal with them. I talked about how hard it is when you have 200 plus people who are already engaging in an unlawful act. You can't send 1 or 2 officers to go deal with it. It's unsafe and it's ineffective. And so I have to have 10, 15, 20 officers plus resources like drones and other things ready to go with a plan already in place. And so we have to do a good job of identifying them early through social media and other means and having that ready, because in the moment when I already have no officers available because they're all on calls, it's very hard to deal with something like this. But that's the same thing that really applies to every challenge that we have. And like I said, the good news is we have a large academy right now. We have 33 people left in our pre-academy. And in a year from now, when they're out of the academy, they're off field training, depending on how many make it through, that could change everything for us. And so there is, I think, a light at the end of the tunnel, and we're pursuing other things like laterals. We have the Ranger program, and I think there is hope that things will be different this time next year.
And so as Chief said, there is hope, and we continue to work, and we continue at the local end to support our law enforcement and all the resources that they need, from staffing to innovation and technology. but I can't help but say this over and over. They respond to 150,000 calls a year. We're chasing the same individuals over and over. And that's where the laws have to change, and the consequences have got to be there. Otherwise, we just need more and more officers. If the laws don't change, we're constantly just chasing the same people.
Mm-hmm. And Fernando Macias, that's something that you have maintained your commitment to even when you were campaigning. And we've been seeing even the press releases coming in from your office talking about the offenders that you guys are keeping behind bars. Talk to me a little bit about your vision when it comes to handling these repeat offenders.
Well, certainly the role of the district attorney's office, and we're working very hand in hand with law enforcement to identify really the worst actors in the community. And no matter where you have an opportunity, it doesn't matter, the charge doesn't have to be a felony. It can be an armed robbery charge, or it can be a domestic violence charge that's a misdemeanor. It can be a DWI. Wherever these individuals are having difficulty, then the goal is to prosecute to the maximum degree the individuals that are repeatedly damaging the community. And there's ways to do that by the communication and the identification and taking advantage to prosecute. But one of the things I do want to encourage, we need a more civil, well-behaved community in general. We talk about the juveniles, talk about the parents, talk about the level of domestic violence in the community and people will criticize, well, law enforcement needs to be everywhere. Well, they can't be, but so much of their time is being spent related to domestic violence. So if people were better behaved, if people would select, I know it's simple, a better relationship, you would have less strain, less demand on law enforcement. So in general, we should have higher expectations, not only of our children, we should have much higher expectation of our parents and our own individual conduct in the community, because that's what requires so much resources from law enforcement.
Mm-hmm. And let's talk a little bit more about that. During a recent press conference that you held, you guys did show some video of when you guys responded to an event like this in the past and were met with a lot of anger, people throwing stuff at you guys. Can you talk about that rhetoric and just how important it is for parents to talk to their kids about law enforcement and that, they're here to help?
Well, now I'll go back even one step further. I think if we look at the issues we're talking about right now, especially with juvenile crime, it comes down to the family and to the parents. And it's rare when we have a kid who's engaged in this type of behavior that has two parents in the house who care. They don't even have to be doing it perfectly. There's exceptions, but the rule is that there's usually one parent in the house or they're in the system, the foster system. And there's all these other things that have gone on in their life, like domestic violence in the past. And so that's a large problem to solve, but that's really what's going on here. And the education system and all these other components can do their best to intervene and prevent stuff, but it comes down to the family. And so we see these kids with this lack of respect. And I think some parents probably are surprised by their kids' behavior, but that is the culture that we're seeing. And it's gotten worse over the last 5 years, especially since COVID, which again, it's a complicated thing. That probably is one of the factors. But respect for law enforcement and authority in general is now the exception. And it's rare when I have a kid who shows that respect that we're interacting with, even for things that are not serious. We restore that, we change a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And let me encourage, again, we know who's getting in trouble in the schools. We know who's getting in trouble because of the juvenile probation office reporting or having to deal with them. The first step is to start working with the younger siblings of those same people that are already old enough to be having violent interaction in the community. Programs that would start working to make sure those younger siblings are being redirected, to make sure they have the extra resources of support in the school, to make sure they have access to therapy, to basically be bringing in the parents to try to encourage them to work with the younger siblings. Even if we started doing that at a far more intensive level than historically we have, we would see some results.
Mm-hmm. And I think the message to that I've heard from so many people in the community just over the last week and a half talking with individuals, especially parents, older individuals as well. One thing that a lot of them do tell me is that they feel like these kids think that they're untouchable, but in your guys' eyes, they really aren't, because if they're committing a crime, they will be prosecuted, correct?
Yes. I think that some of the challenges that the local district attorney's office had was a real dramatic shortage of attorneys, basically holding cases in abeyance, several, probably 1,000 cases waiting to be prosecuted. So when people say that there's nothing that can be done about juvenile crime, forgive me, we are starting to prosecute juveniles as youthful offenders, which potentially could lead to years in custody. So I understand the need, and I'm not criticizing. We can always make improvement in our laws, but we need to step back and say, what can we accomplish with the laws that we have? And it's far more than what people understand. And that is the goal. That will be the consistent goal. And I know working with law enforcement, identifying where we need to intervene, identifying the worst actors in the community, both adult and juvenile, will produce results.
Yeah, if I could add to that, there's been breakdowns at every level of the system. And so I do believe that our laws, especially when it comes to juveniles, are a problem. But there's also examples, when we look at one person who said, let's say they've had 15 crimes that they've been charged with as a juvenile. Well, the reason there's been no accountability isn't all our state laws. It's partially because potentially the district attorney's office in the past has had some failures, or law enforcement has had failures where we didn't show up or we didn't provide discovery in a timely manner. And so there has been breakdowns at every level, and I agree that within the framework of the existing laws, we have to do everything we can to have accountability. But the reason we're able to prosecute these kids as adults essentially is because it's first-degree murder. The list of crimes where we can do that is basically that, first-degree murder. And so I think there's definitely tweaks that need to be done. I can give you an example of 10 kids in the past year and a half that our street crimes unit has gotten charged federally as juveniles where there's been accountability. And those are kids who have a very, very long history of violent acts, along with stealing vehicles and breaking into houses and cars. The only thing that actually gets accountability is charging them federally instead of through the state system. And so I do think there definitely is a breakdown in some of our state laws and how those accountability mechanisms work.
Mm-hmm. And then I know we haven't heard from you that much, but I kind of just wanted to question for all of you guys just how important it is for collaboration between all entities to be able to make Las Cruces and Doña Ana a safer place.
Right. Well, I think that it's an all problem, right? It's the community, it's law enforcement, it's the district attorney's office, but we can collaborate and make things a lot better, right? It's, if you see something, say something, right? Law enforcement doesn't know what they don't know, and if we can reach out and be a little bit proactive and maybe stop a violent act because we were able to get a heads up and have a presence, it goes a long ways, right? But it goes back to what everybody here is saying is that, you know, the system has failed, right? But that's no excuse for us to not keep looking forward and be proactive, right? And at the end of the day, you know, we're all from the Las Cruces area, and it's an incident that shocked not only Las Cruces but Doña Ana County, right? And so, like I've had conversations with some of the people here, and you know, we'll do whatever we can to help support and try to better the system, whether it's with the district attorney's office or LCPD, just to be better, right? But it also, we need the help of the community, right? If they see something, say something. Lock your vehicles, limit the access to weapons. And it is, you know, we get burglary calls all the time, unsecured vehicle, gun stolen, right? And so if we limit those accesses as a community, then maybe we prevent an incident from happening. Mm-hmm. Not that it's all going to stop, but prevent an incident here and there, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the start.
Mm-hmm. I'd agree with that. The system has failed, but I want to be very clear, our law enforcement did not. The city of Las Cruces has not. The promise to hold these offenders accountable is not a failure. And so we have some real heroes that are sitting at this table, and they deserve to be commended in the way that they have responded to this tragic incident. What is failed are the systems in place to intervene early on. We have a revolving door of criminals here in New Mexico, and that starts early with our juvenile offenders. How do we interject? How do we break that pathway from far earlier than a triple homicide? How could we have intervened to prevent this? A lot of that is changing the culture of New Mexico, where we respect law enforcement, we respect adults, we respect teachers in the classroom, that we provide better alternatives and a pathway for success for no matter who they are. But I will tell you that offenders and criminals, violent criminals, regardless of their age, should not be allowed to roam free and terrorize their community. And that's when we need to step in and hold them accountable and refuse to be tolerant of this behavior.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure what your guys' connection is with probation officers. However, could you guys touch, I know you can't speak for them, but touch on maybe what you've heard in regards to them stepping in and the issues that they're up against and faced with?
Yeah, I can tell you what they told me directly. I went up last year and spoke at their conference and presented with District Attorney Bregman and Sheriff Allen from Bernalillo County. And the message was clear. They don't have the tools to deal with their kids. And these are people, some of them have been probation officers, juvenile probation officers for many years. It's gotten worse. And the kids will tell them to their face, you can't do anything to me. And the probation officer will say, they're right. I don't have a response to that. I can't bluff them, they know. So they are frustrated, and I don't blame them. We need more of them, but that's a hard job, and there's not a lot of incentive to do it.
Mm-hmm. Did anyone want to add anything to that?
My perspective maybe is a little bit different. Mm-hmm. I don't care if it's an adult probation officer or a juvenile probation officer. People don't comply with the terms of their probation. Either level can proceed with sanctions through the court to hold these individuals accountable for not complying with their terms of probation. So it really is kind of the attitude. If you see most of the violations, they're not only repeat crime, but the far greatest majority of violations of probation, continued drug use, continued alcohol abuse, failing to address addictions till when they're finally committed to the penitentiary so that they can go through the drug intervention programs there. So I hear the concerns. I don't say that they don't exist, but I'm saying that the system can be effective even the way it's currently structured if you have the resources and the commitment to push through the levels of accountability that the senator is talking about. People can be held accountable, and they're going to see in this particular case how accountable people can be held. But it's the entirety of the system. On any given year, there's at least 3,000 contacts with law enforcement by children under the age of 18. But maybe about 25% of that is multiple contact. So when people think about the magnitude of the number of children having contact with law enforcement, it's hard to get your arms around it and what it takes, because you can't be just addressing a few kids. You have to be addressing 3,000 children. But only 25% of them are the potential future violators of significant laws. So there's ways to look at the problem, there's ways to address it if the community will support it, and if there is the level of coordination that's necessary among the stakeholders here at this table.
Thank you. And let's talk about now, as just in closing, what's next for Las Cruces at the local and the state level, and Doña Ana County as well. I'm sure since this tragic event happened, there has been conversations had. What is in the works right now to be able to better support kids in school, better to support, the rising crime that you've been very transparent about, better to support, the district attorney's office in prosecuting these individuals?
I can say for the city of Las Cruces, I've received numerous calls from individuals that are wanting to have car shows, that are wanting to have an event at Young Park. And I've said this before, if Las Cruces is going to heal, we need to stand strong. We need to stand united. We need to move forward. Police is getting their resources. We had park rangers. They just graduated from the academy. So we'll have those security measures. But as the district attorney Macias has said, we need a more civil, a more sense of well-being community. That if we're going to stand united, we need to come together, work with the schools, work with nonprofits, work with our faith-based organization, the city, the county, working together. And I've said it before, I'd rather gather than scatter. We need to stand strong so that we can heal and move forward. And we'll put all the resources we need to make Las Cruces safe and to be a sense of well-being.
You know, for too long, people have thought that crime, out-of-control crime, is an Albuquerque problem. And I think this tragic event is a reminder that crime is now rampant, not just in our urban areas, but rural New Mexico as well. And that anyone can fall victim, including, you know, the quaint, lovely town of Las Cruces. This is heartbreaking. And so it's going to fall on all of us to recognize that New Mexico is now a lawless state. And we have to do all we can to bring back respect to law enforcement, to strengthen our legal systems where we identify failures and gaps, and to work collaboratively to make New Mexico the worst place to be a criminal. Send them to jail for a long time if they must, but to send the message that if you come here and break laws at any age, you will be held accountable.
Mm-hmm.
And I will continue to advocate for those changes at the state level. I do think some of those changes need to be made for us to really get a grasp of the crime situation and not be number one in the country for crime. But at the local level, for us, it's about coordinating with local law enforcement, doing projects, obviously staffing I talked about. But this summer, we're going to do a joint operation with the Sheriff's Department, state police, and our federal partners, specifically targeting violent crime and gun crime related to violent crime and stolen firearms. And that's one of the ways that we send a message. We make people feel safe, because that's just as important as the actual crime rates. Right now, people don't feel safe, and I don't blame them. And when people don't feel safe, they can't live their lives the way they should be able to. And so we'll continue to do our job on a daily basis, but this summer we're going to put some resources into trying to address some of these issues.
Is there anything else that anyone wanted to add?
I just wanted to share that, you know, what happened in Las Cruces is very sad. It's horrible. It's a senseless, violent act that took place. And we grieve with the parents and with the victims, their families, their loved ones, their classmates and all. But we will make sure that justice is served and that we will continue to be strong.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to just echo that. Las Cruces is a wonderful community. There's wonderful people. There's wonderful students. I'm always amazed when I go into the schools, the level of talent, the level of enthusiasm, the potential future. So I certainly don't want this kind of incident to overpower what the sense of the Las Cruces community is. I know that there's a lot of concern. I know that this has been maybe an awakening in terms of that underlying culture and how potentially dangerous it is. But I want to have a more positive view in terms of what we can accomplish if we're working together, and the sense of the strength of the Las Cruces community.
And I think even what they're saying is, you know, at the end of the day, whether the incident happened in Las Cruces, but Doña Ana County, you know, Las Cruces is in the middle of Doña Ana County, right? And we will be stronger after this incident. You know, we will, like the mayor said, utilize whatever resources we can give and gain and be stronger.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys so much for your time and for being here with us today. We really appreciate it. I know a lot of hard questions as well, and you know, I'm from the Las Cruces community too, so I get it, born and raised. And we want to thank all of you watching us, our viewers, for being with us throughout our coverage. You can always watch this in its entirety again by going to kfoxtv.com. It will be posted there.
Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We're clear. Awesome.